Today is September the 2nd, 2015. My name is Rafael De Cardenas. I was born in Havana, Cuba, May the 8th, 1944, and came to the United States in 1961 as a refugee because of the communist dictatorship of Cuba. Perhaps Cuba was the most beautiful country in the world. As the famous words of Christopher Columbus when he arrived in Cuba, November 27, 1492, he said to have exclaimed, "This is the most beautiful land that human eyes have ever seen." My family came to Cuba from Spain after Spain colonized Cuba, and they established the family there. As a matter of fact, there's a town in Cuba, east of Havana, called Cardenas City. It's probably the second largest commercial bay in Cuba, and it has also the most beautiful beach in the world in Cardenas City, which is Varadero Beach. My great-grandfather was a Major General of the War of Independence in Cuba in 1898, the Spanish-American War. He was, I'm told, a very distinguished man who eventually, after Cuba became a republic, he was made Justice of the Supreme Court of Cuba. He was also one of the writers and the signatories of the Cuban Constitution. That was my great-grandfather. Don Severo Pina was his name. My grandfather, my paternal grandfather, who was my hero, the one I loved more than anything else, he was my buddy. There wasn't, in my opinion, a better man than my grandfather was. Dr. Humberto De Cardenas was his name. That's my middle name, Humberto. He was Attorney General of Havana, a position that he was appointed to and kept for 43 years until he died. One of the reasons why I said my grandfather was the greatest guy I ever met in the world, the greatest man I ever been in the world, is the fact that I remember as a kid going to work with Grandpa. And from the shoe shine boy to the president of the MAC, everybody had to say something to my grandfather. And I remember vividly his assistants wearing guns and having bodyguards. My grandfather never did. And I said, "Grandpa, why don't you do this?" He says, "Son, the reason why I don't do it is because I have no enemies. All I do is try to do good to people." He said those two guys are fools for doing that. He had a .38 caliber gun at home, and he said that's what it is for protection. But my grandfather and I were so close, and I'm getting into my grandfather because I'm getting teary-eyed right now too at the same time I'm talking about it. I never forget some of the anecdotes that I tell, okay? In 1956, my grandfather and I came to the United States together, just the two of us, just the two guys. I was 14 years old, and Grandpa wanted me, his buddy, to come with him. He made it a point, though, when we came to the United States, we were going to take a boat from Havana Bay all the way to Key West, Florida. And we came in a ferry, city of Havana. He wanted me to experience a sea voyage. It took the whole day. It's only 90 miles between Cuba and the United States. It took the whole day. We arrived in Key West, and then we went to Miami. New Yorker Hotel in Miami. I'll never forget the name of the hotel. And we spent probably some of the most wonderful 2 weeks that a young man could have with his grandfather. One anecdote I tell about the trip, though, that people don't understand too much. While we were in Miami, we visited a lot of places. We went to a place called Vizcaya, in Biscayne Bay. Beautiful mansion, actually it's a palace, which was built by John Deere Company, International Harvester. This is right in front of Biscayne Bay. Okay, as a matter of fact, in the bay side of the house, he had a sculpture in the rocks, a Spanish galleon, where he had his parties over there. The gardens were unbelievable, but I regress in telling my story. I said I was 14 years old. I was in the gardens of Vizcaya, which is fantastic gardens. I tell anybody, if you ever go to Miami, you got to go to Vizcaya. Okay? We go, every time I go to Miami, we go and spend the day in Vizcaya. We never get tired going. So I'm over there in the gardens, and suddenly I get thirsty. So in the gardens I see 2 water fountains. One says color, the other one doesn't say anything. So in my mind, when I drink this water, it's going to be pretty color water coming out of there. So, and I proceeded to drink my pretty color water. I thought it was going to come out of there. People were looking at me real funny. Like, what are you doing, you know? Well, finally my grandfather called me to the side, and he told me what was going on. My only answer to him was, why? I was never used to that. I never heard of that before. Because in Cuba, there was no difference in the races, to my opinion. As a matter of fact, Antonio Maceo, they used to call el Titán de Bronce, the Bronze Titan, who was one of the actually the biggest hero of the War of Independence in Cuba, was the black man. And he was very, very well loved by every Cuban. So, you know, there was no difference. But that was my very first encounter with prejudice. I'd never seen it before. I tell that story to the side, you know, because sometimes people think about it. Now, I will elaborate that when Fidel Castro took over Cuba, he started the civil unrest in Cuba. He started doing this where it was never before. As a matter of fact, 2 stories I'll tell you. When I was working underground in Cuba against Castro, some of my best buddies were black. They stayed in my home with me, they hid with me, we did everything, we went to school together, we did everything. And the other story I'm going to tell you is that after the Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba, when Castro made a big Roman circus of the Bay of Pigs, and there was one black officer captured over there among them. And Castro asked him and said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "I came here in a parachute to kill you, sir." So this was created by Castro. It never happened in Cuba before. Then in 1958, I had the opportunity to come to the United States for a summer vacation with my 2 cousins. And we came to Valley Forge Military Academy for the summer camp. It was terrific. We flew from Havana to Miami. Then we took a plane in Miami and we went to Philadelphia. So we'd spend 2 fantastic weeks, 2 fantastic months in Valley Forge, and we had a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun, and we had to see a lot of things. And then on the way back, they had arranged for us to fly out of New York. So we took a train from Pennsylvania to New York, or from Philadelphia to New York, and we stayed in a hotel in New York for 2 days before our plane left. And we went to see the Empire State Building, and we went to see the Rockettes at Radio City Music Hall. And then we returned to Cuba. The following year after that, we had an opportunity to go to Camp Susquehanna, New Milford, Pennsylvania. And that was just fantastic. Right in the mountains over there. It was just fantastic 2 months that we spent over there. Now I will tell you, one requirement when you went to summer camp was this: you did not speak another language. And like, for example, in the cabin where we stayed, there was one Spanish-speaking person, the rest of them were all Americans. So you were forced to learn English. And as a teenager, you learned it well. So, you know, those were my previous trips to the United States. Then, I will tell you, Cuba was a beautiful country, as I mentioned before. Not only was it beautiful, but it was a rich country. Cuba, in 1958, the value of the Cuban peso was 1.2 American dollars. Cuba's economy was thriving. Not only Cuba was known as the sugar bowl of the world, he had the biggest industry in Cuba was sugar. And like I said, the nickname was the sugar bowl of the world. But I think that a lot of people don't understand and don't know is that not only the sugar, Cuba was known having some of the bigger copper mines. The textile industry in Cuba was great also. Cuba, the income per capita in Cuba in 1958, remember this is 1958, was $300 per person. When I came to the United States, I was making $275 a month. In 1958, that was pretty good money to make. That was the income per capita in Cuba. The educational system in Cuba was next to none. Educational system was free. All the way to college, all the way to the university. The only thing you had to do is buy your books. Which I'll tell you about the education in Cuba. A lot of people were amazed when I came to the United States. How come you know so much, you know? Well, here's the thing. When you went, for example, to high school in Cuba, high school was 5 years, okay? But when you went to high school, you didn't choose which subjects you get. You went in and they told you this is what you're going to take. For example, people don't want to believe that I took philosophy, psychology, trigonometry, logic. All of this were required in high school. When you got out of high school, you were required to have at least 4 years of English. Then, when you got out of high school, you could go directly to the career of your choosing. But if you wanted to do sports, that is something you did on your own, away from the school. We had physical education, but sports was not a subject. You participated in the sports because you wanted to, and you did it in a private club or someplace else you wanted to, but not there. You didn't go to school. You went to school to learn, not to play. So this is one of the things a lot of people, for example, when I came to the United States, all my subjects from high school were good and they were accepted. Now, in order to go to college, we mentioned Northwest Classen High School. I had to go to Northwest Classen to take 2 classes a day, English and American Government. I was required to take them both. In order to graduate from high school again, I had to graduate and then go to college. So like I said, I was the first graduate from high school, graduate from Cuba. Now, what again I regress. Cuba again was a beautiful country. It was lovely, it was fantastic. The economy was great. Everything was great. Cuba had one problem. We had a corrupt government. And this has been going on for a long time. So the people in Cuba were not happy with this. And they wanted to make some changes on it. They wanted to be Cuba a complete democracy. So we were looking for something. Finally, this young lawyer by the name of Fidel Castro showed up in the mountains. And he started preaching what we wanted to hear. And he promised us hope and change. So we bought into it. And I will qualify this. Whoever says any difference don't know or is lying to you. The middle class in Cuba and the rich class in Cuba were the ones who supported Fidel Castro there. They were the ones who helped Castro get to power because we believed in him. On January 1st, 1959, he finally came down from the mountains. And it was a joyous day in Cuba, believe me. Bells were ringing in all the churches, horns were ringing, everything, you know, it was fantastic. We have finally achieved what we've been looking for. And Cuba was, we thought, free. Very first speech that Fidel Castro made was in what they call Columbia City. Columbia City is the equivalent of the Pentagon here. He spoke, and funny thing happened. I tell the story. You know how communists are. So they let a lot of white doves fly. One of these white doves got on Castro's shoulder. I was there for a few minutes and people taking pictures and everything. A symbol of peace, whatever it was. The thing about it is when the dove left a reminder to Castro. And kiddingly, people in Cuba say, if Cuba's ever free, we want to make sure to make a monument to the dove, because the dove knew what he was before we knew it. But that first speech of Castro probably was the key to what was going to happen in Cuba. As a matter of fact, my father turned to me after hearing the speech and he said, "Son, we made a grave mistake. This man is not good for us. He fooled us. He fooled the Cuban people. He promised, again, hope and change. I'm going to give you what you want in Cuba. We're going to make it the better country than what it is already. Economical and everything else. So we're going to go ahead and make some changes in order to do this." And he mentioned this, which you probably heard it before. First thing we're going to do, we're going to take from the haves and give to the have-nots who need it so much. Okay? So he proceeded to, the first thing he did was, he came in Cuba with a, well, first thing he did, he established the People's Tribunals in Cuba. But the People's Tribunals was this: if you had a grudge against anybody, for whatever reason it was, you went to the People's Tribunals. And you denounced that person for whatever it was. This was composed by Castro Army people and whatever, you know, who did this. And you went into there, so if you had a grudge against me, all you got to do is go, hey, you know, he said, I saw in my own eyes, okay? I was in the park in my hometown walking around, actually going to high school, which he was on the other side of the park. And I heard somebody yell, "There he is!" They think I knew 3 or 4 people lowered the machine guns to this one guy. No questions asked, nothing. That person was shot right in front of my eyes. It's the firing squads in Cuba was daily. Hundreds of people get shot in the firing squad, which was instituted by Che Guevara, by the way. So he promised that he was going to make some changes in Cuba. So he came with the agrarian reform. First step of agrarian reform, he said, anybody who has over 10,000 acres of land, anything above 10,000 acres of land, is going to be taken by the government. But if you got less than 10,000, that's fine. Well, 10,000 acres of land is a lot of land. And a lot of people, again, implemented divide and conquer. Because what he did was, the people who had 9,999 acres of land say, "Hey Charlie, I feel sorry for you, but I got to protect what I got." Second step was 5,000 acres. Then he went to 1,000 acres. Then he went to 100 acres. To finally none. I remember, again, I was a teenager. I was 15 years old, 16 years old maybe, and I went with my father, my grandfather, and my uncle, and my uncles for when they took the family property away from us. I went with them, and they told us, they said, "Well, you're going to be allowed to have 100 acres, but I will tell you this much: out of this 100 acres, you still have to maintain the cattle over here. It's your responsibility, not ours. You got to maintain it. You cannot sell or buy anything unless you go through the government first." By that time, again, you had probably 20 or 30, it seems as many, militiamen around you, and there was 4 or 5 of us, you know, unarmed people and whatever, and said, "Now you can pick the part of the ranch you want." So we picked the part with the barn and the houses and everything else. We were told, "No, you cannot do that." So, you know, we couldn't keep that. Ended up, and my father finally said, "Look, you're going to leave me 100 acres. You're not going to let me work it. You're going to put restrictions on everything I do in my life, and say you're telling me that you're taking over the whole ranch, right? I'm going to become an employee of yours." Well, basically that's what we want to tell you, yes. And eventually they took everything away. Then the next step they took was what I call the money law, by which if you had over $5,000 in the bank, anything over $5,000 was kept by the government. Bear in mind, all the businesses were taken over by them already. But then that $5,000 that left in the bank, it was managed by them, and they will give you whatever they want to every month for you. Okay, they'll manage that for you. They had what I call the agrarian reform. I'm sorry, the urban reform, by which, and this is an interesting subject because a lot of people don't understand this. Okay, let's say that you were buying a house and it was only you and your husband living in the house, or you and your wife living in the house. You and your spouse, I guess, but it was better, living in the house. And you had a 3-bedroom home. So they came to you and they said, "Look, you have a 3-bedroom home. It's only you and your spouse living in this house. We're going to send somebody else to live with you over here because it's not fair that these people don't have a place where to stay and you have extra rooms." In the case, for example, my aunt, what she did, she invited her maid and her family to move in with her. So what the heck, they've been with me for 20-some years, you know. They're family. They don't live in this house, but they're family. So she invited them, they moved in. At least she knew. Now let's say also, you're buying a house. They have passed what I call urban renewal law, by which if you lived in the house, you and your spouse, and they had to say a 3-bedroom home, and it was just you and your spouse. The government came to you and told you, said, look, you have a 3-bedroom house, it's only you and your husband, or you and your wife. We are going to have to send some people to live in this house with you. As I told the story, my aunt, what she did, she invited her maid and her family to move in with her. She said, you know, they've been with me for over 20 years. They're family. So I might as well move with me, you know. So they moved in. The second part of the law was, they came to your house. You were buying a house. So they came to the house you were buying, and they will decide how much the house was worth it. So then let's say that you've been living in the house for 10 years, and you've been paying $300 a month for the house. So they made a decision then, if you paid for this house for so many years, and you've been paying so much every year, I don't think you need to pay in the house anymore. The house is yours. Now, and if you owe any money, you pay to the government, and the government will reimburse the owner of the house. So that's that was another part of the law. Then finally came into the small business. They came to a small business owner, and by that I mean anybody who had a hamburger stand was a private owner. They came to them and they told them, say, okay, from now on, this business, it belongs to the government. Now, you can manage the business for us, and we'll pay you a salary for it, but any profits or anything on the business you will not get. This belongs to the government nowadays. So that's, you know, then what happened very clearly was this. They decided it was time for religion to be exterminated in Cuba. Now you got to bear in mind that Florida, Cuba, the majority of Cubans were Catholics. That was the predominant religion in Cuba. I'd say probably 95% of the Cuban people were Catholic. So the first thing they did, they went to, and they started rounding up priests and brothers and ministers of other religions or whatever. They put them on trains. They took them to Havana Bay, where they put them in a ship, and they shipped them out of Cuba. They closed all the Catholic and all the private schools in Cuba completely. So from now on, you don't need this. We don't need all these private schools, and all these schools right now are going to be converted into training camps for the young.
Where did they send the priests and so forth?
They sent him, I don't know, they put him on a boat, they sent him to Spain, primarily, you know, whatever, they sent him to Spain or whatever. Then, and some of them arrived to the United States. La Salle brothers, Belen brothers, even there was an American school called Pinson College, which I think it was home by the Methodist Church, I think, in Cuba, whatever, you know. So they closed all the schools. Only public schools were permitted in Cuba. Private schools were completely closed. And you were required. That's when it came the thing that it was time to do something about it. And we started, the underground started really active in Cuba. I was a member of the Cuban Catholic Youth. Our group of the Cuban Catholic Youth became a group of the underground against Castro. I never forget these words. When we decided we were going to fight communism, our group went to our spiritual advisor, Father Rainier LeBrock was his name. And we asked him, I said, Father LeBrock, what's happening? Why do we do this? He says, son, I only can tell you one thing. The Christians of today are no longer martyrs. They are warriors. And as such, should fight the forces of Lucifer that mean to destroy our country. Therefore, a group of teenagers became freedom fighters after that. And we did things that I don't wish any teenager will ever have to do in their life. I lost my childhood. I became a man then because I had to assume the responsibilities of a man at 15 years old. I never forget, as a member of the underground, we were told that this particular priest, we all loved and adored, and he was actually one of the leaders of the underground in Cuba, Catholic priest, was coming to a church near to us. So a whole bunch of us went over there to listen to this priest, okay? Well, also some of the militiamen decided they were going to go and boo him. Now, bear in mind, we were teenagers. So they started booing, and we started trying to hush him up. That ended up in a fight in the church. And I'll never forget this. I am in the middle of the fight, and I'll turn around to punch the person who's doing it. It's my father. I said, Dad, what are you doing here? He said, you're coming home with me. I said, no, sir, I'm not going home. I'm fighting for my country. I'm fighting for God. You know, I was 16 years old, or 15 years old. I'll die for my country. Whatever is necessary, I'll do. So I turned around and I started going. Next time, he grabbed me by the shoulder, turned me around, and he punched me. He said, you're coming with me now. He went ahead and took me out of there, took me home. What happened is several of the parents found out what was going on, and this was a neighborhood church. So they came on in and they got us out of there. Of the ones that didn't come in, that stayed over there, some of them ended up in jail, and one of them actually ended up in the firing squad. So I thought my father was the most unfair person in the world. I thought he was a coward. Later years I get to thinking about it, I said, you know what, my father saved my life. Because I probably could end up in prison or somewhere else. My father saved my life that day. So we continue our fighting against Castro, etc., etc. Finally one day, I'm sitting at home. Now we're not going to school because we cannot go to school. Unless you want to go to indoctrination classes, you cannot go to school. So one day I was sitting at home, and the husband of a lady who had been our maid comes in, and she says, I want to let you know there's orders. The guy was in the militia. He was a good guy, but he was in the militia. There's orders to arrest you tomorrow because of your underground activities. So again, I'm 16 years old, so I go ahead and say, so what? You know, let him come. You know, whatever. My mother was there. My mother got worried. So, and I went out to meet with my friends in the underground. And by the way, one of my friends in the underground is now a Catholic priest in Cuba. He stayed in Cuba, he became a Catholic priest. And there's some other stories about that I'll tell you later. But, so I went out to meet with my underground people, And they gave me the word, the same thing. They said, hey, look, they said, we got word that they're coming to arrest you tomorrow. Well, I said, well, let them come, whatever, you know, I'm a big guy, you know. So I left, came back home. By the time I got home, my father had everything packed. And he said, we're leaving town. I said, why? He said, you didn't pay attention to you. See, but we're leaving town until things calm down. Because we, you know, if they're coming after you, they're not going to find you here. So we left, come away, city where we lived. And we told everybody we were going to Havana, to my aunt's home in Havana. We did neither. I mean, we went to Varadero Beach, which I mentioned to you before. And we stayed over there in Varadero Beach close to a year. However, we did not stop doing something in Varadero Beach. Our house in the beach became a safe house for the people, my friends in the underground. They became a safe house. We came up with a password, and they came in, and through that whole year, we probably had, I don't know, 8 or 9 friends of mine, or people that I knew that were, stayed in our house until we secured safe passage for them. How did we secure safe passage? My father's brother was very well relationed with the embassies in Cuba. He was friends with the ambassadors in Cuba, of the free countries. So he arranged for these people to get out of Cuba by going to the embassies. Now, there were a couple that in the middle of the night, they came a boat in the ocean, picked them up on the beach, and goodbye. And they escaped Cuba that way. So that was you know, we did this. Then we're leaving over there, and we you know, I mentioned before, I thought my father was a coward for a while because of what he did. Well, one day we're sitting in the house on the beach, and there's about 5 or 6 men sitting over there talking to my father, very secretively. I didn't know what was going on. I wasn't allowed to be there. They were sitting in another room, door closed, whatever it was. Years later, while I'm living in the United States, I made a mention to that. So one of the guys that was sitting over there said, let me tell you, said, your father and us, we were coordinators from all the states. And we were meeting over there, we were coordinators on the underground from all the states. And we were meeting with your father, coordinating everything on the underground. I never thought my father, you know, would do this, you know. He made me a completely new look at my father, okay. My father was a hero then. He came that fateful day of the Bay of Pigs invasion. I will tell you, 2 days before the Bay of Pigs invasion hit Cuba, April 17, 1961 was the date. We were told, they came to our home, and they picked my father and I, and they took us to a baseball stadium where we were kept for 2 weeks until the whole invasion was over. Because they knew ahead of time that the invasion was coming, that they had concentrated everything over there, waiting for the invaders to come. We were kept for 2 weeks together with 5,000 other people. The militia men came over and got us, and we were kept in a baseball stadium with 5,000 other men, 50-50 machine guns in every gate. They opened one restroom bank for all to use. Our family was allowed to come in once a week and bring us some food so we could eat, otherwise you starved to death. And after the Bay of Pigs invasion was all over, then we were allowed to leave the baseball stadium. By the way, they did this for in every city, every town, and they use every big building, facility, stadium, whatever it was. They virtually made concentration camps out of this. After 2 weeks, and the whole invasion was over, they let us go home. However, for some reason, the leaders of the underground were kept. They knew who they were. They were kept. I know I got a cousin that was kept and served many, many years in prison because he was one of the leaders of the underground. Then, by that time, we realized that the underground was lost. There was not much hope for anything to happen. So my father came to me and said, "Son, it's time for you to leave leave Cuba." He had not allowed me to leave Cuba before because he knew me. And he was afraid that as in the Bay of Pigs invasion, there were over 35 of my closest friends in that invasion. He knew had I left Cuba before, I would have gone to the training camps and I would have come back to Cuba in the invasion. And he was afraid I would do that. So finally he said, "Well, it's time to leave." So we arranged through what they call the Peter Pan or Pedro Pan program. Peter Pan program. It was a program instituted by a Reverend Walsh in Miami, a Catholic priest, by which somebody here in the United States, family, friend, a charity organization, whatever, would procure your passage, would procure your visa, will make arrangements for you to leave Cuba. Unfortunately, that was very sad for me. I had over 35 of my best friends in that invasion. And I had a very dear uncle in that invasion. They were put in a circus, almost circus atmosphere, when they were taken to the Palace of the Sport, which was a big auditorium, and there they were being shamed by Castro and Castro's people. Then they were taken to prison and were stayed for pretty much almost 2 years until they were traded and came back to the United States. I said it was a sad day for me because to see 35 of my best friends and a very dear uncle in prison and knowing what they had to go through, you know. My mom used to go visit my uncle every single day and brought him whatever he needed, you know. The interesting part is this uncle that was in prison, he had gone to Catholic school with Fidel Castro. And he tells some stories. He said, he was telling a story one day, he told me, said, when he came over to visit the prison, Castro came over to visit the prison, they hid me. Because they knew that Castro, anybody that known him in the past, he would be that much tougher to them. So they used to, my cellmates used to hide me, so he wouldn't see me. So anyhow, finally, this destroyed the underground in Cuba. The movement against Castro was destroyed after the Bay of Pigs. So it was time to leave Cuba. My father, as I said before, had always been afraid for me to leave Cuba because he knew that probably I would have been back with those people had I left the United States earlier. But now it was time to do it. Now, through a program called Pedro Pan, or Peter Pan, which was started by the Catholic Church in Miami, Monsignor Walsh, they acquire permission for anybody under the age of 18 to be able to leave Cuba as long as they had secured passage, a visa, which used to be called a waiver visa, and somebody here in the United States responsible, make themselves responsible for them, their welfare when they got here to the United States. So my sister and I left December 4, 1961. I was 17 years old, my sister was 12. We got in that plane, just the two of us with a whole bunch of other kids. I will tell you, I saw every human expression in that plane. Primarily when the pilot said, "You're flying over free land." I saw people crying, people laughing, people dancing. Any human expression possible I saw seeing. But I was there thinking that I had left my mom and dad. I don't know if I ever see him again. So I said a prayer. I will tell you, upon arrival to Miami International Airport, I kneeled and kissed the ground and thanked God for letting me be in a free land. We came to leave with my aunt, my mother, one of my mother's sisters, whose husband was the one I referred to, who was the president of the Bay of Pigs, that uncle. We came to leave with her. She had 3 little kids. So we became part of her family in Miami. And then I started going to school, Miami Edison High School in Miami. I started going. Then, fortunately, after a year or so, we got word that Mom and Dad were going to be allowed to leave Cuba. And I'll tell you the story because I can never forget when we went to the airport to pick him up. A friend of my father drove the car. We got to the airport, and upon seeing my parents, I hugged them and kissed them and whatever, you know. But I went to get the car. When I came over with the car set, I fainted in the car. Next thing I knew, I was awake in the hospital in Miami. The doctor said I had a seizure. And he said the reason why you had a seizure is you had so long waiting for your parents and not knowing would they be here or not. And they finally arrived, and I guess you had a seizure. You couldn't stand it to see that. But finally we were together. The 4 of us were together again. My father, 3 days after arriving in the United States, who had been a businessman in Cuba, got a job working as a truck driver for a gasoline company in the Everglades. He said, "Son, I don't want to hand out from anybody. I earn my own money any way we can." So he was driving a gasoline truck in the Everglades. You know, he told me, he said, "Son, you know, I got my life, I got my family, I got my God, and I have a chance to start all over again. And we will make it anew here in the United States." So we stayed in Miami for a while. Now my dad, I don't know if I said this before, but he was educated. He went to high school in Asheville, North Carolina. And then he went to Louisiana State University for 3 years. He didn't graduate, but he went to LSU for 3 years. And Dad always said, Miami is a beautiful place to visit and to vacation. But if I want to make a future, we have to get out of Miami and go west, young man. We were fortunate enough that we had a friend, a doctor friend of the family, who was living in Oklahoma. I'll explain this to you. Most of the doctors in Cuba, even though had been in practice for a long time, when they came to the United States, before they went to practice, they had to do their internship and everything before they were allowed to practice on their own, no matter how long you've been in practice before. So this doctor, friend of the family, was here in Oklahoma. And he knew our desire to leave Miami and come west. So he was approached by Jim Norick, who was the mayor of Oklahoma City at the time, and his wife Madeline. And he told him and said, "You know, I have a close friend and I are wanting to sponsor a Cuban family to Oklahoma." He just told him and said, "Well, I just happen to know a family that would love to come to Oklahoma." So about a week later or so, Mr. Norick and his wife came to Miami for a visit. They were going to a convention or something. They came and visited with us. And they came in and they said, well, we'd love for you guys to come to Oklahoma. Think about it and let us know. In the meantime, we're going to make some arrangements. About a few days after they left Miami, a few days later, Mr. Norrie called. Said, okay, we're ready for you guys to come to Oklahoma. What's your decision? So my father said, okay, we're coming. He said, okay, the plane tickets are on the way. Everything's been arranged. So we're coming to Oklahoma. Okay, I never forget. January 3rd, 1963, we arrived in Oklahoma. When we got to Will Rogers, it was a dreary day. It was just, kind of, dreary. So we got in Mr. Norrie's car. As we are going away from the airport, I noticed in the ground some ice in the ground. We go a little bit longer, I noticed some snow on the ground. This is January. Well, we go a little longer and the sun is shining. And I said, my God, what's going on over here? That's the first time I heard Mr. Norrie tell me. In Oklahoma, if you don't like the weather, stick around 10 minutes, it'll change. So we came and got established into Oklahoma. Mr. Norrie and his friends, particularly a very dear friend by the name of Bob Wilkes, B.G. Wilkes, they actually arranged with their friends where they got us a duplex on 21st and Villa, around 21st and Villa. And in that duplex, they had also arranged, they found, between them and their friends, got a lot of old furniture. So they had it, the furniture for us, and they went as far as button up groceries for a month. Then Mr. Norrie, Mr. Wilkes told my father, said, okay, this is Thursday, enjoy it. Monday morning somebody will be here at 7 o'clock in the morning to pick you up and take you to work. And the kids tomorrow, Madeline Norrie is going to be here to take you and get you enrolled at school and get you started. Welcome to Oklahoma. You're on your own. What else can a person expect for help in that? That was our beginning in Oklahoma. We acclimated. We all got jobs. I went to school and work as well, and paid for my own education, and decided it was time to start the American life. I lived in Oklahoma for several years. Then, through the companies I worked for at the time, I was transferred first to Fort Worth, Texas. I was there for a year, came back to Oklahoma. Then I was transferred to Kansas City, Missouri to open a branch of the company I worked for. And then they transferred me to Chicago. And finally came back to Oklahoma in 1985. I came back to Oklahoma. And we stay here. So I started attending Northwest class in high school. I was the first Cuban graduated from Northwest class in high school in 1963. But I went to school 2 hours a day. Fortunately, all the credits I brought in from Cuba were accepted in the United States. The only thing I had to do in order to be able to go to college, I had to take English and American government. So I went 2 hours a day to school, took my English, my American government, and threw in distributive education too. I decided I was going to do that too. So I went to work after school about 11 o'clock in the morning. I went ahead and I got in the bus and I went to work. And I was working B.G. Wilkes cover sign indexes where my father worked, and I was helping over there. And I'll tell you a cute story that happened to me in working over at B.G. Wilkes. You have to remember that I came to the United States three times before, to visit and summer camp and whatever. So I know English. But when I was going to high school, I had an English teacher by the name of John Pershing Miller. Mr. Miller was a stickler when it came to pronunciation and enunciation. You didn't say, I ain't, or you didn't say, I can't. You had to announce everything. So I'm working over there that day, and one of my fellow employees, I asked him a question. I asked him, I said, do we need to ship this package? And he says, I reckon so, but I ain't going to do it. So that's when I decided that I better learn Okie, because the English I knew was no good, you know. Anyhow, I went to school, I worked, then I went to Central State College, now UCO. I went for 3 years, and then it was time for me to become a citizen of the United States. In the meantime, I came as a refugee. I was under a refugee visa. Then I went ahead and applied for my residence visa, my residence stay, which it was quite a thing to do. I'll never forget, I had to make a trip with a friend of mine. We made a trip to Fort Worth, Texas, to the VA hospital over there, to have a physical taken. Then I had to go to the immigration office in Dallas, Texas, because Oklahoma City didn't have an immigration office then, and apply for my blue card, or my green card rather. Actually, it's blue, but they call it a green card. It's more blue than green. Anyhow, I finally received that. 5 years later, it was my turn to become a citizen of the United States. In the meantime, I reported every year to the government by going to the post office, getting this form every year in the post office, filling the form and mailing it to the immigration department. They knew exactly where I was, what I was doing, and where I was living. I didn't care. It didn't bother me at all. I thought it was my obligation to do that. Finally, it was time to become a citizen. So I got notification that now it's been 5 years since you became a resident, you can become a citizen now. So I applied for citizenship. And then I was required to take citizenship classes. So I went to old class in high school on the evenings and take citizenship classes. Even though most of the information I knew, then I went ahead and took the test in English, by the way. And by the way, I aced the test. Then it was time to become a citizen of the United States. So November 27, 1969, I will never forget that day. We went to the court, and together with I don't know how many other people were over there from different countries, I swore my allegiance to the United States, which, by the way, I swore my allegiance to the United States and renounced any previous allegiances. I understand that's been changed now. You get a dual citizenship now. But I became an American citizen. And as I said many times, I do not like hyphenated nationalities. I'm an American. If you want to call me something else, you can call me an American of Cuban heritage. Now, I'll never forget that day, because after getting sworn in, Mr. Norrick happened to be in the crowd. He came over to see me become a citizen. The judge saw him over there, and he asked me if he wanted to say a few words. And Mr. Norrick stood up, and he spoke to all of us. But in particular, he was looking at me. And he says, you know what? I was born in this country. So I'm a born American citizen of this country. You have chosen my country to be yours. Therefore, I expect you to be a better citizen than I am. Immediately following that, with a group of friends, we walked about 4 blocks, went to the county courthouse, and I raised a Republican. That night we had a party in my house. They gave me a party, which unfortunately I got sick before the party started. So they had a good time, but I got sick that night. I don't know, it was my nerves or whatever it was that day, you know. Having become a citizen in the United States, I also got quite active in politics. And those days, you know, before I even became a citizen, I got involved in the Goldwater campaign. And I did just about every week. I was invited by a civic organization, church, political organization, fraternal organization, whatever, to come and speak about Cuba and tell my story. I did that constantly. But I felt like that was my obligation, as it is right now. I feel like, you know, to tell my message to the people is my obligation. There are several things that we can talk about about coming to the United States and the Cubans coming to the United States. See, we came to the United States and we never paid any attention to anything that people say about us that did about us. We knew we were better than that. I remember even in high school, you know, where kids call us names and whatever, in Miami primarily. So I lived some discrimination in my life. However, we ignored it, we forged ahead, became citizens, lived the American life, and we became an example for the Hispanic in the United States. To the extent that a couple of years ago, Geraldo Rivera called us uppity Hispanics. The reason being is that the Cuban American was the only group of Hispanics that did not vote for Comrade Obama either elections. We knew better, and we still know better. But then we started living our lives here in the United States. Recently, we saw, as little as 8 years ago, a new movement coming into my country. And I saw a lot of similarities to what I've seen happen in Cuba. So I started once again fighting the forces of evil. And this time we're here in the United States. Unfortunately, there's so many people that think that, oh, this could never happen here in the United States. This is something that will never happen in the United States. Well, I got news for you. It's happening here in the United States. And every single day, something new happens to take our freedoms away. For example, this deal with Cuba now, where Comrade Obama and his minions are making friends with Cuba. People in Cuba are still oppressed. There's still people in prison in Cuba. People are getting beat up in Cuba. In the meantime, we're making friends with them. We're making nice to an oppressive regime who's killing the people of my country. We're talking about opening the doors to Cuba again. The thing that a lot of people don't realize is this. Every single dollar that goes to Cuba in tourism is going to a corporation owned by the government named Gaviota. That corporation is managed by the Cuban army. And all the money that goes there, it goes directly to the Cuban government. It doesn't go to the people who need the money. To go to Cuba right now will be help the oppression and the repression of Cuba more than ever. I have a very dear friend who happens to be a Catholic priest in Cuba. And him and I communicate, and we talked about it. And he tells me the story. He said, Ralph, what is happening in Cuba, this is not going to help at all. Because the embargo never was meant to destroy Cuba. The embargo didn't do a thing to Cuba. What happened to Cuba was the bad management that the government had As an example, he told me, said, you know, a few years ago they decided they were going to sell as much sugar cane as they could. Cuba was known as the sugar bowl of the world years ago. Well, they said, cut every piece of sugar cane that you can. Time came to sell, there were no buyers. Well, anybody knows that if you're going to cut sugar cane, there's some that you have to save. You cannot cut it all. You got to cut a field and leave another one up. You just don't cut it all. Well, they destroyed the sugar industry in Cuba completely. A lot of the things that happen in Cuba, you know, has been self-inflicted by them. And this is what we're doing to Cuba right now. We're helping Cuba now. Instead of see, the Russians were there. They left. Venezuela came in. They left. This was the time to tell Cuba, say, hey, look, you either quit what you're doing or we're going to go in. We're going to do something about it. Instead of that, what do? Pretty please be our friends, you know, and we're giving up all the principles that we always lived through because of the government that exists in this country right now. Cuba is a beautiful country. The beauties of Cuba are parallel to none, in my opinion. Cuba has probably the most beautiful beaches in the world. Paradero Beach is my Eden, I guess. It's unbelievable. Someday, yes, perhaps, people ask me, said, do you like to return to Cuba? I said, I would love to go to Cuba someday. I would love to go with my friends. I would love to go with my family. I would love to show the places where I was born, where I was raised, the places I love, and they're still in my heart, and they'll always be in my heart. And I would love to stay in Cuba as long as I want to. But then I want to come back to the United States. I want to come back home. This is home. And I'd like to come back after I stay in Cuba as long as I want to stay in Cuba. But the only way that I will ever do that is to go to a free Cuba. If Cuba is totally free, I'll go back to Cuba. Otherwise, I'm not going to go to help my enemy with my dollars. I love America, and this is my country. And I hope by the prayers of everybody and people actually taking the responsibility, we can rescue this country from what I call the forces of evil, because that's what they are, the forces of evil, that want to destroy this land. One more thing, I always said, when I lost my country, my native land of Cuba, I had a place where to come. If we lose the United States of America, where do we go? God bless America.